The first thing wrong wasn't the mountain road. It was the battered steel thermos rattling in my cup holder while Claire Morgan sat silent in the passenger seat. 3 hours from the city, one canvas duffel wedged between her boots, and her phone turned face down every time it lit up. The cab smelled of damp wool, diesel, pine sap, and the bitter coffee I made too strong, because expedition guides learn to hate weak coffee before they learn to hate weather. Outside the windshield, sunrise spread orange over the Rockies and turned the snow line on the distant peaks into a blade of light. Inside the truck, the silence kept its elbows sharp. Claire wore a zipped tan jacket over a high-neck thermal shirt, one sleeve still creased from being packed in a hurry. Her hair was loose from the wind at the last fuel stop, and she held the strap of her duffel with both hands as if the bag had the final vote on whether she stayed. I kept my eyes on the road, on ice. Peripheral vision keeps you alive. In a truck with a woman who had climbed in before dawn after one reckless invitation, it kept me from asking the wrong question too soon. "I didn't actually think you'd be waiting by the curb," I said. "You told me 4 o'clock, Claire replied. Her voice stayed even, but her thumbnail pressed into the side of her index finger. The pressure left a small white half-moon in her skin. I like being punctual. The thermos knocked once against the console. I reached over and steadied it before it spilled, then set it back in the cup holder. Last night, I had been on her sister's porch replacing 2 warped roof boards before the next storm rolled in. Claire had stood below with a work call pressed to her ear and a legal pad balanced on the railing, nodding at invisible executives while the porch light made her look carved out of patience. By the time I climbed down, she had ended the call and stared at the dark street like the world had narrowed to one more meeting, one more demand, one more spreadsheet full of people turned into numbers. I had said, half joking, "If you ever need to disappear for a few days, I'm leaving for mountain prep camp before dawn." She had looked at me for 3 seconds too long. At 4 in the morning, she was on the curb. Now the city was hours behind us, and the road was rising. I shifted down as the incline steepened. "We have 3 days to reach the high-altitude training camp." I told her, "This isn't a retreat, it's a staging ground. If I don't clock in by Friday at 1700, Vance takes my lead spot for the winter deployment. He's already filed a complaint that my gear check protocols slow the roster. If I'm late, he gets his leverage." Claire looked through the side window at the thick pines. "He wants your team. He wants the title. What's the difference?" "The team keeps people alive. I kept both hands on the wheel as a patch of gravel shifted under the tires. The title just looks good on a jacket." Her mouth moved like she almost smiled, but the expression disappeared before it landed. Her phone lit up again. She flipped it over with 2 fingers without reading the screen. "That bad?" I asked. She did not pretend not to understand. "My firm wants me in Denver by noon to explain why a warehouse consolidation plan cut 300 seasonal workers off the schedule before winter." "Your plan?" "My model." She looked at the duffel between her boots. "Not my decision. They stripped the safeguards, used the coldest version, and still put my name on the packet." There it was, the first fault line. My mentor, Elias Rook, used to tell me the same thing every season before we stepped onto ice that looked solid but wasn't. You don't fight the ice, you find its fault lines. You don't punch a storm in the mouth. You read the pressure, map the cracks, and move before the weight shifts. I treated people that way too. Keep distance, watch the cracks. Do not lean where someone is already carrying too much. "I can take you back to the nearest town," I said. "No argument. I'll get you a room. Make sure you have a ride, and continue from there." Claire turned from the window. "I didn't get in your truck so you could rescue me from my own decision." The correction was quiet, clean, and deserved. I nodded once. Fair. I turned the heater dial up a fraction and angled the vent toward her side, making it look like I was defogging the glass. "Coffee's black. Drink some if you want it." She unscrewed the thermos cup and poured just enough to cover the bottom. Steam rose between her hands. She held the metal for heat before taking a sip. "It tastes like punishment," she said. "It's expedition coffee." That wasn't a contradiction. A real smile touched her face for half a second. It did more to steady the cab than the heater. We drove another hour before the road ended. Not narrowed, not worsened, ended. A massive ponderosa pine lay across the switchback, its roots torn from the mountainside by a recent washout. Gravel had slumped away beneath the trunk, leaving a drop into a ravine where muddy water rushed over pale stones. A warning cone sat crushed under one branch, orange plastic peeking through bark and needles. I stopped the truck, killed the engine, and listened. No falling rock, no fresh slide, just water, wind, and the tick of cooling metal under the hood. "Stay in the cab until I check the shoulder," I said, then caught myself before the old guide voice became a command. "Or come with me and keep 5 feet back from the edge. Your call." Claire opened her door, 5 feet back. We walked toward the washout. I crouched beside the roadbed and dug my glove into the mud. Saturated soil, weak shoulder, no safe vehicle crossing unless a crew cleared the tree and rebuilt the edge. That would take days. "Is there a way around?" Claire asked. I went back to the truck and pulled the topographical map from the glove compartment. The paper unfolded across the hood, corners lifting in the wind. Claire pinned one edge with the thermos while I traced the main pass with my finger. "We're here. The pass is blocked. There's an old logging road through the valley that meets the highway 40 miles north. It's unmaintained. It adds a day. Maybe more if the weather turns." Her eyes moved over the contour lines. The logistics director came forward before the exhausted woman could stop her. "What does that do to your Friday deadline?" "Makes it tight." "How tight?" "If the weather holds, doable. If we lose traction or burn extra fuel, ugly." I folded the map enough to show her the alternate route. I can still turn back, get you to town, and drive through the night alone. Claire's fingers flattened the map against the hood. The wind pulled one strand of hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear herself and looked at the broken road. "I said I wouldn't slow you down." She said, "We take the logging road. You understand that means a cabin tonight. No power, no comfortable bed, no guaranteed cell service." She lifted the thermos, screwed the cup back on, and handed it to me. "Grant, my office has fluorescent lights, 6 dashboards, and men who use the word family before cutting payroll. Your cabin is not the threat." That should not have been funny. It was. I tucked the map back into the truck. Logging road it is. The first 10 miles were hard. The next 10 were mean. The road clawed through pine and granite, all exposed roots, deep ruts, and mud glazed by last night's frost. I drove in 4-wheel drive low, hands steady, shoulders loose, reading the ground the way I read ice. Too much throttle and the wheels would spin, too little and the truck would bog down. Claire sat beside me with one hand on the grab handle, eyes scanning the tree line without complaint. By late afternoon, gray clouds covered the ridgeline. Rain struck the windshield in heavy drops, then thickened. The dirt softened under the tires until the truck moved through mud with the stubborn slowness of a loaded sled. "We need to stop," I said. Claire looked at the endless forest. "Here. There's an old forestry cabin 2 miles ahead. It won't have power, but it has a roof. If we keep driving and slide into a ditch, no one winches us out until spring." "Cabin," she said. We reached it as the rain turned to wet sleet. The cabin sat in a clearing under a rusted tin roof. One room of dark logs, a sagging porch, and a stovepipe angled like it had been arguing with gravity for years. I parked under a cedar, grabbed my gear bag and canvas tarp, then stopped at the door with my hand on the latch. "I need to check inside before we settle," I said. "You can wait by the truck where it's warmer, or you can stand by the doorway with the flashlight. I don't want you in the corners until I check for rot." "I'll hold the flashlight." I handed it to her. The beam swept over dusty floorboards, a wood stove, 2 bare bunks, and a table scarred by old knife marks. I checked the corners, the ceiling, the flue, and the stovepipe. No fresh droppings, no rot soft enough to worry me. The chimney was clear. "Good enough?" she asked. "For people who call expedition coffee punishment, maybe?" Her smile came faster this time. I brought in firewood from the truck bed and had flames licking through the stove within 10 minutes. Heat arrived slowly, first as color, then as smell. Resin, smoke, and old dust waking in the corners. Claire stood by the door with her wet jacket darkened at the shoulders. "Your jacket is soaked," I said, holding out my insulated parka. "Do you want this until yours dries? It's clean enough by mountain standards, which is legally different from actually clean." She took it with a tired laugh. "I'll accept the mountain standard." The parka swallowed her. The hem nearly reached her knees, but after a minute by the stove, her hands stopped shaking hard enough to hold the flashlight steady. I set the camp stove on the table and heated water. While it boiled, I unfolded the topo map again. "I need another set of eyes," I said, tapping the root with a pencil. "Hold the beam here and tell me if I'm missing a drainage crossing." Claire moved beside the table. The light trembled once, then steadied over the contour lines. She was tired, but the minute she had a problem to solve, her spine straightened. We worked in the small circle of light while sleet hammered the tin roof. "I'm calculating fuel burn," I said. "Mud drag adds more than I budgeted." "You're assuming highway tire pressure." I looked up. She kept the flashlight on the map. Lower pressure gives you more surface area. Better grip means less spin and less wasted fuel. You'll lose speed on the highway, but if we're mostly off-road until tomorrow, traction matters more. I stared at the route again. She was right. "I'll air them down at first light," I said. Claire tapped the pencil against the map. I was good at my job before they made it ugly. The kettle hissed. I poured water into the meal pouch and set it between us with 2 plastic forks. "Then tonight," I said, "you used it clean." She did not answer. She took the fork, waited for me to take mine, and ate while the stove ticked and the cabin grew warmer by degrees. Before sleep, I took the lower bunk and left the upper one for her where heat would collect. I set the battered steel thermos near her boots, close enough to reach if she woke cold. "Coffee," I said. "Still tastes like punishment, but it holds heat." From the top bunk, Claire reached down, nudged the thermos with 2 fingers, and turned it so the handle faced me in case I needed it too. "Shared punishment," she said. I lay awake longer than I should have, listening to the stove tick and the sleet strike the roof until the cabin quieted around us. Morning came gray and hard. The mud had frozen into ruts deep enough to steer the truck for me if I let it. I aired down the tires with a digital gauge, my fingers stiff inside my gloves. Claire came out of the cabin carrying the thermos and the map. My parka was folded neatly on the passenger seat. Her own jacket, now dry, was zipped to her chin. "The road is worse," I told her. "Then we drive smarter." For 6 hours, smarter felt like crawling. The truck bucked over frozen mud, scraped through brush, and climbed slopes that seemed designed by someone who hated axles. Around noon, a sharp crack snapped through the cab. The steering wheel jerked. I fought the truck into a stop as the front passenger side dropped hard into a rut. The sidewall of the right tire had been sliced by a buried rock, not punctured, opened. "Can it be patched?" Claire asked, already unbuckling. "Not a sidewall tear." I checked the tilt of the truck and the mud under the axle. Spare's good. Jacking it is the problem. I pulled the floor jack, that lug wrench, and leveling blocks from the bed. "I need your help," I said, "but you get the choice after I explain the risk." Claire stepped carefully through the frozen mud. "Explain." "I have to set the jack under the front axle. The truck is angled, and the mud can slide. I need someone outside watching the suspension coil and the jack base. If either shifts, you yell once, loud, and I roll out. You do not try to catch anything. You do not step under the truck. If you'd rather not, I'll build a block platform first and do it slower." She took the steel jack handle from me. "I'll watch. You build the platform anyway." I almost smiled. Good call. We set the blocks first. Then I slid into the frozen mud and positioned the jack. The cold went through my jacket instantly. Claire stood where she could see the coil, the base, and my shoulder. "Slow pumps," I called. The jack clicked, the axle lifted. "Pause," she said. I froze. "The base is biting into the left block." I rolled out, adjusted the platform. and slid back under. The second lift held. Claire's voice stayed steady through every inch. When the spare was ready, she handed me lug nuts in the order I set them down, then braced the tire with both gloved hands while I seated it on the studs. By the time we were done, mud covered my sleeves and the knees of her jeans. I lowered the truck and tightened the last bolt. "We lost an hour," I said. "We kept the axle," she answered. "That is the worst motivational poster I've ever heard." "It's efficient." I handed her a clean rag. "Unfortunately, yes." Her laugh was small, but it stayed in the cab when we climbed back in. By evening, the radio crackled. "Parker, this is Vance. Read me, over." I picked up the handset. "Parker." "You're not at the checkpoint," Vance said. His voice carried that polished satisfaction men use when rules bend their way. "It's Thursday night. If you're not through the gates by 1700 tomorrow, I'm pulling the roster change. Director signed off. You missed the window. I lead the ice team. I know the deadline. Word is the main pass washed out. Unless you grew wings, you're stuck. Don't get yourself killed trying to save your pride." The radio went dead. I set the handset back without slamming it. The road ahead was dark, wet, and narrow. The old version of me would have driven harder until skill turned into stubbornness. Skill gets people home. Stubbornness gets people buried. Claire watched my hand settle back on the wheel. He sounds like the kind of man who says teamwork right before taking credit. He's a politician with crampons. That should be illegal in several states. The laugh came out of me before I could stop it. It scraped some ice off the inside of my ribs. Then the math returned. "We have 30 miles of logging road left," I said. "Then the summit road. If it snows tonight, I'll need chains on the ascent. That costs time we don't have." Claire pulled her tablet from her bag. "You have a satellite uplink?" "Yes." "Password?" I gave it to her. She connected, then stopped with her fingers above the screen. "I'm not accessing anything private. Public forestry notices, permitted transport routes, and commercial supply schedules only." "Good. And if I call anyone, you approve what I say before I say it." I glanced at her. "You don't need my permission to use your skill." "No," she said. "But it's your deadline and your professional record. I won't step into it without consent." That landed harder than it should have. "Then yes," I said, "help me find a legal route." Her fingers moved across the tablet. Snow began ticking softly against the windshield. For 10 minutes, she said nothing. She checked the Forestry Service Permit Board, the Regional Avalanche Advisory, and a commercial freight schedule for base camp supply drops. The glow of the tablet lit the focused line between her brows. "There," she said. "A transport company out of Denver has a permitted supply run to your camp tomorrow. Helicopter for high-altitude cargo, ground crew for propane and food. Staging area is an old gravel quarry 5 miles from where this logging road dumps out." "I can't put the truck on a helicopter." "No, and you shouldn't. The helicopter is under capacity, but not by enough. The ground crew is driving a plow truck up the summit road after the flight cargo is loaded. If we reach the quarry by 1300, you can leave the truck in authorized parking, log onto their transport sheet, and ride up with the crew. It saves chain time and avoids an unchained climb." I stared through the windshield, seeing the route rearrange itself in my head. "You want me to leave my truck at a quarry and hitch a ride in a snowplow? I want you to make your deadline without pretending risk is courage." I looked at her then. She turned the tablet toward me, route highlighted in blue. "You don't fight the ice," she said. "You find its fault lines. This is a fault line. Grant." The thermos rattled once in the cup holder. I reached for the map, marked the quarry with a star, and wrote beside it, C. Morgan, Logistics. Claire looked at her name on the paper. "I spent 5 years using models to reduce people until they fit into columns," she said. "The better I got, the more they promoted me. Yesterday they wanted me to defend a plan I never would have approved if I had still been a person in the room instead of a signature on a spreadsheet. I capped the pen and set it beside the thermos instead of reaching for her. Today you use the same skill to keep someone safe and keep a promise on the clock." I said, "That counts." She looked at the star on the map, then folded the edge down with her thumb like she was marking a page she wanted to find again. "Get some sleep," I said. "We push hard in the morning." Morning brought whiteout. Snow fell in thick sheets, reducing the world to the 10 feet in front of the headlights. The wipers slapped heavy blocks of snow from the glass. I kept the truck in four-wheel drive low, careful with the throttle, reading where the road should be under the fresh powder. At 11, we had 20 miles to the quarry. At 12:45, the trees finally opened. When the tires hit paved highway, I did not celebrate. I kept the speed disciplined, the wheel steady, and my eyes on the shoulder. 10 minutes later, the rusted chain-link fence of the gravel quarry appeared through the snow. A yellow plow truck idled in the center of the yard, diesel exhaust rolling into the white air. A foreman in a high-vis jacket was securing propane tanks under a tarp. I parked near the sign marked Authorized Temporary Vehicle Hold, photographed the location and license plate from my own log, then took my guide credential and the map. Before I opened the door, Claire touched the transport sheet on her tablet. "Want me to explain the route, or do you?" "I'll open. You fill the gap if I miss something." "Good." We walked through the snow. "Grant Parker, Alpine Guide Service." I called over the engine. "You're heading to base camp?" The foreman looked at my badge, then at the weather. "Last run before they close the road." "I have a contractual report deadline at 1700. Main pass washed out. My vehicle is secured in the authorized hold area. We're requesting transport as passengers if you have capacity." Claire stepped forward and held out the tablet. Screen tilted away from the snow. "We checked the public permit route and your posted load sheet. 2 passengers won't alter the payload class. We'll sign the transport log and follow crew instructions." The foreman studied the screen, then looked at me. "You two always talk like forms with boots?" Claire answered before I could. "Only when forms are warmer than walking." The foreman snorted. "Climb in. I need names." He wrote both our names on the transport sheet. Beside Claire's, after she gave her profession, he added, "Logistics Observer." She watched him write it and did not argue. The plow truck smelled of wet wool, grease, and metal warmed by hard work. We sat in the extended cab while the blade dropped with a scrape that vibrated through the floorboards. For 3 hours, the truck pushed snow over the guardrails and climbed toward thinner air. I watched the altitude climb on my watch. 8,000 feet. 9. Claire sat beside me with one boot braced on the floor mat, marking the map margin with a pencil. Every time the road vanished under snow, she looked at the foreman's posted mile markers and checked them against the route. At 1640, the iron gates of base camp appeared through the whiteout. The plow truck rumbled through and stopped near the main logistics hut. "End of the line," the driver called back. I stepped down into knee-deep snow and turned toward Claire. The wind slammed into the open door. "The gusts are worst on the left," I said. "Do you want my shoulder as a windbreak, or do you want the rail?" "Shoulder," she said, already reaching for her bag. I angled myself between her and the wind as she stepped down. She did not need carrying. She needed a steady line through the storm. We crossed the yard together, boots punching into hard snow, and reached the main hut with 10 minutes to spare. Warmth hit as I opened the door. Wood smoke, damp gear, coffee left too long on a burner. Guides turned from the central table. The camp director sat with the roster ledger open. Beside him stood Vance, holding a clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that needed witnesses. "Parker," the director said, checking his watch. 1650. "I'm here." I dropped my gear bag on the floor. Vance stepped forward. "You're late for gear check, and you brought a civilian into a closed staging camp." "The deadline to report is 1700. I said, "My gear's in the bag. Check it." "You didn't drive through the gates. You abandoned your rig and came in on a supply truck. If you can't even navigate the summit road, you have no business leading a team on the ice." I took the signed transport log from my jacket and placed it on the table in front of the director. "Main pass washed out." I said, "I rerouted via the logging road, stabilized a tire failure, secured my vehicle in the authorized quarry hold, and used an existing permitted supply transport to meet the contractual time without risking an unchained climb on a storm-closed road. Vance's smile thinned. I pointed to the foreman's timestamp. I minimized exposure, preserved equipment, avoided unnecessary vehicle risk, and hit the time clock. That's what a lead guy does. We don't fight the ice. We find the fault line and move through it. The room went quiet except for the fire. The director read the transport log, then looked up. Agreed. Your lead on winter deployment. Gear check starts in 20. Vance looked at Claire. And her. What exactly is she supposed to be? Parker, your assistant. Before I could speak, Claire stepped around me. She unzipped the parka just enough to free the visitor tag the foreman had clipped to her jacket. It read, Logistics Observer, in block letters written with a dull pencil. I'm Claire Morgan. She said, I'm a logistics director, and I rode under the supply crew's transport manifest. I can confirm, mister. Parker selected the lowest risk route available after the washout. He didn't abandon protocol. He solved around a broken route without pretending pride was a safety plan. She set her tablet on the table, open to the route comparison, if you'd like. I can also show how much time was lost to the tire failure and how much was recovered by avoiding the summit chain-up window. The director's eyebrows lifted. He turned the tablet enough to read the first highlighted route. Vance looked down at his clipboard. Claire stayed in the light, hands still on the edge of the tablet, waiting until the room caught up with her. Finally, the director said, Thank you. Ms. Morgan, useful work. Claire looked at Vance. Useful work is the point. No one laughed. They didn't have to. I picked up my gear bag. Let's go. Grant, Claire said. You have gear to stow. Right behind you. We walked down the narrow hallway toward the assigned quarters. The bunk room was small, bare, and cold around the edges despite the heat from the main room. One bunk, one desk, one frost-marked window looking out over a world reduced to white. I set my bag on the floor and left the door open a hand's width. Not because I didn't trust either of us, because the storm had taken enough choices today, and I wasn't taking one more. Logistics Observer, I said. Claire let out a shaky laugh and set the battered steel thermos on the desk between us. It was the only title available that didn't sound like stowaway. It worked. You worked? She tapped the thermos with one finger. You kept asking where the risk actually was. Road, tire, snow, deadline. You didn't turn fear into speed. I looked at the thermos instead of at her face. The dented steel caught the room's yellow light. I leave for the ice in 3 weeks. I said, 4 months. I know. I can't ask you to wait for a man who lives half his life in places where phones die and weather makes the schedule. You didn't ask. She opened her hand on the desk, palm resting beside the thermos, not reaching past it. I got in the truck. She said, I'm not asking you to stay off the ice. I'm asking whether the passenger seat is still mine when you come back. The wind hit the wall hard enough to make the window click in its frame. I placed my hand over hers on the desk, over the narrow strip of wood between the thermos and the map. One steady pressure, no pull, no claim. She turned her hand under mine and squeezed once. You're not a fault line. Claire, I said, you're the person who helped me find one. She looked at the open door, then back at me. Then come back from the ice. I will. This time, it wasn't a promise made to calm a storm. It was a route I intended to follow. 20 minutes later, the director checked every item in my gear bag while Claire stood near the stove with the transport log tucked under one arm. Beacon, probe, satellite messenger, ice screws, medical kit. The list was boring, which made it beautiful. Boring meant nothing had been skipped. Boring meant a client would not discover my mistake at 19,000 feet with a storm moving in. When the director signed the roster beside my name, he looked from the bag to the route map Claire had marked and tapped the quarry star with his pen. Clean choice, he said. Claire did not look at me when he said it. She tightened the cap on the thermos and tucked the map into the front pocket of my pack, exactly where I would find it before the first morning briefing. 6 months later, the air smelled like pine needles and warm earth instead of diesel and snow. I drove the truck up a different mountain road with the windows down and the sun on the dash. The passenger seat was occupied, as it had been every week since I returned from deployment. Claire had one boot braced on the floor mat, marking the margin of a roof estimate with a pencil. The corporate firm was behind her. 3 weeks after I left for the ice, she had resigned and taken a role running supply chains for a non-profit disaster relief agency, where efficiency meant medicine arrived before the road washed out. The battered steel thermos sat in the cup holder, dented deeper now from a drop on the ice sheet. It still held heat. Claire still complained that the coffee tasted like punishment. She still drank it when the morning was cold. We pulled into the gravel driveway of a small A-frame cabin we had leased for the summer. On the porch stood a contractor with a clipboard, looking impatient enough to make the siding curl. I put the truck in park. "You want me to handle the roof guy?" I asked. "No," Claire said, tucking the pencil behind her ear. "I negotiated the materials contract. I'll walk him through the load-bearing specs. You can unload the groceries." "Yes, ma'am." I took the paper bags from the back seat while Claire walked up the steps. "Mr. Davis," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Claire Morgan. This is my partner, Grant. We're ready to review the timber framing." I stopped beside the porch rail with a bag of apples in one arm and a loaf of bread in the other. "Partner." The word settled into the boards under my boots like a nail finally driven straight. Through the windshield, the dented thermos caught the afternoon light. The passenger seat was empty only because Claire was exactly where she had chosen to stand, in front of the problem, pencil ready, voice steady, no longer turning her phone face down to survive the day. I carried the groceries inside and left the thermos in the truck for later. Some things did not need to be held every minute to prove they were still there. The roof contractor opened his folder. Claire found the first fault line before he finished his second sentence. I smiled and set the bread on the counter. The road had not become easy. It had become ours. The end